Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Applying a Human-Centric Framework to Accelerate Innovation. My name is Cheryl Auger, Senior Director here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today are my fantastic colleagues, Derek Gingrich, Product Manager, and Matthew Wadden, Analyst here at Lux. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to type any questions you have in the question box on the screen. Time permitting, we'll answer as many questions as possible. If your question does not get answered today, please do not hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearch.com. That's questions@luxresearch.com, and we will respond as soon as possible. If at any point you experience technical difficulties, like a frozen screen, just refresh your browser and check that your internet connection is strong. Now, with that in mind, let's jump into today's presentation.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'm just going to get started with a little personal anecdote to talk about innovation, human-centric framework that we take to it. Let's start with me, specific human. Personally, the background is I used to dislike energy drinks, but now I got converted, basically. I was never a big fan of energy drinks. They felt icky to me. They were always way too much caffeine. The sugar levels were out of control. The flavors were gross. But they also felt like really macho, really blue collar to me or something like that. It just didn't fit with my understanding of myself. And that's, a prime reason for me to not buy a product. It didn't really fit. I didn't understand how it fit into my life. And then lo and behold, Celsius comes along, and Celsius snuck its way into my life because it didn't feel like an energy drink, right? It's marketed as a health supplement. The first time I bought one was at actually a health supplement store. But the look of it doesn't feel like an energy drink. The flavors are palatable. It has healthier amounts of sugar and has more balanced vitamins and caffeine content. And all of this really appealed to me and met me where I am at, right? It appealed to me as the type of consumer that I am. So it didn't really pretend to not be much of an energy drink. At the end of the day, it is an energy drink, right? But it was compelling to me, and it had new meaning that really appealed to me. And now I kind of drink a lot of Celsius energy drink. And so this example, not meant to be a confession of my energy drink love, but it's really meant to show that real innovation sells meaning and not products, right? Celsius sold itself to me on a new meaning, and that brought me into this new category because it really connected with who I am and my understanding of myself and my own needs as a consumer. And that's what human-centric innovation is all about, understanding the consumer and appealing to their specific needs, wants, and understandings about the world. So over to you, Derek.
Thanks, Matt. So today we're going to walk through the human-centric innovation model using these 3 steps. First, I'm going to introduce the model, give you an overview of what the model actually involves, and then we're going to dive into some practical examples of the different phases of the model to show you how they work and how you can use them in your own workflows. Finally, we'll move over to some key takeaways. But to begin with an overview, I want to make it really clear that one advantage of the human-centric innovation model is obvious, and that is reaching consumers like Matt. You may have not known that your product almost meets Matt's needs, and if you just add some energy ingredients to that product, you may be able to win Matt over. Similarly, if you make energy drinks, you might be able to open a whole new consumer base by finding Matt and finding that need and meeting it. But also, human-centric innovation is all about helping you avoid 3 major pitfalls in the innovation pipeline. One is building something technically impressive that nobody wants. 2 is finding a real human need, but lacking the feasible technical path to accomplish it. And 3 is developing a promising concept without organizational belief or funding. So all 3 of these modes can create failure or friction in an innovation pipeline. And the goal here today is to walk through a model that helps you avoid these. So, what is human-centric innovation? The core idea here is very simple. Innovation is all about people. And innovation fails when the technology is right, but it doesn't meet a real human need. We developed this model out of interviews with multiple clients and other top companies to really gather the most successful methods of approaching innovation today. And what we found is that the old model in many of these places was technology first. They were always starting from what can we invent, what can R&D build, what does our lab make possible, that sort of thing. But the new model is really all about being human first, starting from questions like what do people need, what are they ready to adopt, and what will buyers believe in, fund, use, that sort of thing. We also found that this applies to both B2C and B2B. So although we're going to be talking a lot about consumers today, just remember that this is all true about B2B too, because B2B doesn't mean there's no humans involved. Procurement teams, technical, buyers, executives, partners, end users, you, I, Matt, we're all humans here. And a lot of these principles still matter even in a B2B environment. Ultimately, human-centric innovation matters because humans buy products, humans make decisions, humans collaborate, they create IP, they create business models, they interpret stories, calculate risk, understand risk and value, everything like that. And so the job of an innovation is not just to make something possible, but it's to make something desirable, meaningful, and credible that actually matches the human need. Now, this model is built around these three phases you see before you and activities and jobs that fuel those phases. Now, this is quite the overwhelming slide. Don't worry, we're going to dive into these components in more depth. Right now, just let this big model just wash over you. But the Lux Human-Centric Innovation Model is all about giving teams a way to organize innovation from early discovery through to launch around three life cycle phases. First is inspire, second is illuminate, and third is ignite. And we'll dig into each in more depth soon. But inspire is all about discovering that right opportunity. It's about making sure that something is both technically possible and deeply aligned with the human need. And this is where you are seeing things like discovery, opportunity analysis, ideation, and concept shaping. Second is the illuminate phase, which is all about building belief and alignment, organizational belief especially, and a clear business case. This is where we see ourselves writing narrative to get everybody in our organization on the same page, legal and regulatory review, road mapping, business cases, go-to-market strategies, that sort of thing. And third is the ignite phase. And in the ignite phase, that's where we're seeing R&D lab validation, partners in M&A, pilot, commercial release, and optimization. If you need an overview now, just to keep yourself anchored, I like to think of it, inspire is where we decide what human problems are worth solving. Illuminate is where ideas become something that the organization can believe in. And ignite is where the idea becomes real, measurable, and market tested. However, I don't want you to take away from that previous page that this is a straight line. It can look like we're saying move from one activity to the next through the phases, but it's not simply step one, then step two, then step three, then launch. This is a circular learning system where Inspire creates the opportunity, Illuminate builds alignment, and Ignite validates and launches. But the learnings from Illuminate and Ignite feed back into Inspire. We may discover something that makes us realize that we have to rethink through a human need, or we may discover something that requires a whole new discovery process deep into the process of igniting this opportunity. And this is important nowadays, especially because markets change quickly. Consumer needs shift, technologies evolve, regulations change, competitors move, and our pilots are always going to be revealing new information. So the best organizations don't wait till the end of the process to learn and share. Rather, they run everything in parallel tracks: technical validation, market validation, discovery, business case development, stakeholder alignment. These are all happening in parallel. And what looks like a decision gate at the end of a phase, for example, is actually better thought of as something like a learning gate. It's not a no or go no check, go or no go checkpoint, sorry, but rather it's an opportunity to evaluate what you've learned and share that evaluation. The model is more about creating a disciplined way to keep learning without losing momentum. Finally, why is this framework so great? Well, simply put, today's innovation environment is harder than ever before. Budgets are tight, there's a lot of financial scrutiny, high pressure to have measurable outcomes, technological disruption is happening faster than ever before, increased uncertainty around consumer and buyer behavior, and there's more pressure to balance growth, sustainability, consumer needs, et cetera. So traditional R&D-led innovation is just too narrow on its own, but traditional market research can also be too narrow if it's disconnected from the fast-changing technological environment. That's why this framework is all about connecting the pieces that often operate separately, like R&D, insights, marketing, legal, et cetera. And that's especially valuable now because we really need to balance that human desirability component, technical feasibility, business viability, and organizational readiness. So really, the reason this framework works for today is that it treats innovation as a human, technical, commercial, and organizational system all at once. Now that's the overarching framework idea, but what we're going to really be digging into today is the consumer insights side of this equation, how consumer insights functions within the human-centric innovation model, and what the really key jobs and activities are for a consumer insights professional. So to kick us off with that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt, and Matt is going to show us the inspire phase.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. So yeah, the first stage is this inspire phase. It's where we discover and define the opportunities so that we could begin with the human before we move to the technologies, before we move to actually developing things and making sure that the human is always in play here, right? It's an exciting phase. It's where ideas are flowing, new concepts are developed. We're thinking about new technologies. We're thinking about new applications of existing technologies. And it's a creative phase. It's exciting. But that does not mean it's unmoored or ungrounded. It does not need to be chaotic. And it does not need to be unstructured. What our approach does is remind us we focus on the human, and that gives us a sort of a grounding for the type of exploration that we're doing at this early stage. Our approach, well, in the framework, we do a number of different things. Early on, there's discovery and opportunity analysis. This is where we look at new demand spaces or white space within existing spaces, all focused on consumer needs. What are consumers talking about? What is missing? What is emotionally necessary for them? Not just what products they're buying or not buying. Then the other stages, the ideating and the concept shaping phases. This is where we think about how your business's approach, your technologies, your capabilities can fit in and match these consumer needs, meet them where they are, where those align. And making sure that at this early stage, we are developing ideas, technologies that will actually connect with consumers, meet them where they're at, as opposed to creating technologies and searching perhaps in vain for someone who actually wants them in the first place. A really interesting example of this comes from actually the entertainment world, and it's something you guys are all familiar with. It's Netflix. I don't know if any of you guys remember, but Netflix used to just send you DVDs in the mail. That was their whole business model, of sending you DVDs and you'd send them back. And that worked for a while, right? But now that's not what Netflix is. Netflix is a giant content producer, a proper Hollywood studio, right? But they didn't set out to do that. They didn't set out with the ambition of becoming Hollywood bigwigs and competing alongside Warner Brothers or something like that, right? What they did is they looked at what their consumers were actually doing, what their actual consumer needs were, their human behavior around their product offering. And they realized, well, what are consumers doing? Well, they're binging, well, they're background watching, well, they're just consuming as much content as possible. So the human need was no longer for DVDs or this access to this art house cinema or something like that. The human need was for more content easily accessible at all times. And that is where Netflix realized they could step in. And then once they identified that need, they could look to, okay, where do we fit in? What are the adjacencies that we can move into? And that is how they actually connected with the consumers. They didn't set out to corner this market. They set out to appease their existing consumers based on their human needs. And then once identifying that needs, that opened a whole new set of consumers who shared that need, that were amenable and receptive to their new offerings. So how do we do that, or how would you do that while you're working with us? Well, one of our ways that we do this, and this is how I often work with consumers, is using our virtual anthropologist tool. The virtual anthropologist is an interactive way that we interface with and analyze all the consumer data that we look at, right? Our system stores and analyzes and is constantly updated with thousands and thousands of consumer conversations. And the way we analyze them anthropologically is we don't just report on what consumers are saying, we analyze them and understand what is the meaning behind what they are saying, what are the symbolisms, what are the underlying motivations, values, etc., that are explain what they're saying, that explain their existing behavior. And doing so allows us really to connect with humans. It allows us to identify the unmet needs that they have, the existing tensions with the solutions that are currently available to them. It allows us to home in on the emotional needs and not just focus on the functional needs that consumers have, right? And then it also allows us to ideate and shape concepts. We have this, the assistant on board the virtual anthropologist allows us to feed in new ideas and sort of converse with the data, and allows us to really see where things that we're thinking about, or the innovators are thinking about, would actually connect or resonate with these deep consumer needs. So the takeaway from our approach, from the human-centric approach to inspire, to the start of innovation, is that this stage really works best when we widen the lens and go beyond familiar categories to really connect with consumer needs. Do not begin with a hammer in search of a nail. Understand what consumers actually need, and then you could build the right tool, the right product, the right approach that will connect with them. So after that stage, when the ideas are flowing, then we move on to the illuminate stage. So I'll pass this back over to Derek.
Thank you, Matt. So the illuminate stage is really the storytelling stage internally. It's about building organizational belief, alignment, and a clear business case to ensure everyone knows why we're doing this, what human need we're solving, as well as what success is going to look like based on that need. So at its core, it's really, this is alignment, this is storytelling, this is to make sure everyone's on the same page. Illuminate is broken into 5 core activities we see. That's narrative, where you craft the story that your key internal stakeholders will get behind and believe in. Legal and regulatory, which is assessing regulatory and policy risks. Road mapping, which is devising the most organic and inorganic paths for activating the innovation. The business case, which is that strong business case that combines all of that insights work, all of the R&D work, the R&D discovery, as well as the financial case, and really comes with something together so everyone really understands what we're going for. And then the go-to-market strategy, which is about devising that campaign, that marketing, and that sales strategy. Now, we attach different jobs to each of these phases, like doing internal storyboarding, talking about claims and compliance review, that sort of thing. But I want to focus in on one job and one activity in particular right now, which is that narrative phase. And to kind of unpack it, I'm going to look at Microsoft's adaptive controllers. So everyone understands An adaptive controller is like a video game controller for, in this case, Microsoft's Xbox consoles. But for any video game playing interface, an adaptive controller is any controller made for people with different mobility needs. And really, Microsoft's Xbox adaptive controller is a great example of the Illuminate phase at work, and really points to how, by understanding a human need, Microsoft ultimately built out and helped define a broader adaptive gaming ecosystem. So what makes this story really powerful to me is that this is an innovation that is not just a hardware story. It's totally a story about alignment. The original human need was pretty clear. Traditional controllers assumed a certain kind of body, mobility, grip strength, dexterity, endurance, that sort of thing. But for gamers with limited mobility, this assumption creates exclusion, and many games were not playable at all, given off-the-shelf and fully supported hardware. The reason that this is a very challenging opportunity is because of this, the difficulty of justifying building all of this new hardware infrastructure for an addressable market that may not be big enough, right? As an idea, a product like the adaptive controller, a narrow ROI model of understanding why we're building it can really harm an idea like this from ever coming to fruition, because you might be concerned about the addressable market, but also the normal hardware margin expectations, because so much R&D is going to have to go into this, it might be hard to even make that money back over quite a long time period. But the organization did an amazing job at illuminating the opportunity here. And the Illuminate move in this case is to redefine ROI more strategically. It's not only about immediate product revenue, but ROI can also include, depending on the data and the insights and the human need that's fueling the work, expanding access to an underserved audience, strengthening platform loyalty, building brand trust, even just demonstrating leadership as a brand in inclusive designing, or creating learning that will improve future products, something that's usually difficult to capture. As well as making the brand promise of bringing gaming to a wider audience, which is really core to Microsoft's gaming strategy, very clearly tangible. Now, by rethinking ROI and aligning around ROI and building a clear narrative about what we're trying to accomplish here, it doesn't make the financial case disappear, of course, but it means that the ultimate business case that comes out of this narrative alignment is more complete, with new data points grounded in human needs, the sort of work that Matt just demonstrated in the previous section. And really, the key point here for me is that Illuminate helps us all align on and agree on what value means and what success looks like before the project gets going in a real strong way and is judged by the wrong metrics. Now, when working with us, one of the many ways we help craft narrative internally is through our system of cultural maturity. So cultural maturity tells us when an idea is likely to hit mainstream, where an idea in a conversation currently sits among consumers, how much they agree about the idea. And we attach the various stages of maturity, new ideas, early consensus, mainstream acceptance, and established ideas to playbooks and methods of how you should think about tackling that audience, the sort of consumer you'll likely see. Is it going to be more of an early adopter that is looking for really niche features but is willing to pay a bit more, for example? Or is this people have really strong established ideas about that you need to meet, that sort of thing? And by thinking through the cultural maturity of a conversation around an opportunity, we can better ensure that everyone's aligned around what human need is being met, but also what value we can expect out of this human need, and therefore what success would look like in this innovation pipeline. And really, overall, the story of Illuminate is that storytelling becomes leadership. Telling the story about why building this adaptive controller will build a brand trust and expand an audience and really make tangible a promise that we're already making to our consumers, and having the data to back that up about what's available, how much agreement there is, everything else can tie the data, the strategy, the emotional case together and make sure everyone is clear alignment on why we're pursuing an opportunity before we start building out R&D and doing test pilots and that sort of thing. So now we'll move on to the final phase of the human-centric innovation model, and that's Ignite. And for that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. So yeah, the Ignite stage, the final stage, is where we move from innovation as a concept to the market. This is where ideas become tangible and we start thinking about strategy for execution, right? There's a lot of different facets to this in the framework, and Lux can help with a number of these, especially on the tech side, figuring out partnerships and working on innovation pilots. But the way I most often work with with clients from a consumer angle is this optimization angle, right? As Derek pointed out earlier, this is not a one and done linear process, right? These things are iterative, these things are ongoing, and really the human angle is super valuable and indispensable, really, to optimize, making sure you're putting out the best version of the product, and that's an essential part of innovation. The example I want to look at to really hammer this home is Domino's Pizza. And in some ways, this is a bad example because Domino's, basically, they became so terrible that their pizza was basically inedible, synonymous with the grossest thing you could eat. So obviously, none of our clients would ever let their products get so bad. But on the other hand, it's a good example because they did very publicly, very openly, what the best innovators do behind the scenes and before it gets so bad. Domino's adopted what they call an end-to-end pizza turnaround. And in this case, they acknowledged that what consumers were saying, which was your pizza is really bad, and they took consumer feedback and approached each element of their offering and revamped it, took more consumer feedback, and went back and sort of in this ongoing iterative process to make their output better. They said, okay, how do we make the cheese taste better? What do people want from the sauce? What about the crust? And doing this very visibly sort of showed that, hey, we are open to learning. We're open to consumer feedback. And in doing so, they made their product better. And they got more buy-in from consumers because they were responding to the very consumers who were buying their product. And that then allowed them, once they got their offering, up to a point that met consumer expectations, then they could expand. Then they could offer desserts and they could move into other adjacencies and things like that. So again, Domino's, they let it get really bad, but they also really exposed very openly a very positive approach to innovation, namely that optimizing means listening to consumers, responding to consumers' needs throughout the life and launch cycle of a product. And so the way we would do this when you work with Lux is through ongoing collaboration and ongoing monitoring. You could work with a Lux expert, and I encourage you to do so, at every stage of a product's launch life cycle. You could work with, one thing I love to do is collaborations where someone like me from the consumer insights side works together with someone on the technology side to talk to clients across their org and the R&D and sort of keep both the technological side and the human-centric side in view as the product is going to launch or as it's entering the market. Another thing we like to do in sort of an ongoing session, an ongoing way, is monitor consumer conversations. We could look at how consumers are talking about certain product or certain strategy prior to launch. We could check back in 6 months later and see how that has changed, how the consumers are receptive to or the values around it have changed as the market has changed once it's been launched. We could look at how perturbations in the market, in regulation, are changing these things. All of this allows clients to continually be aware of what is most valuable and to keep the human in mind center stage, even at this later point in innovation. It's often here where I think clients sort of lose focus on the human. They get so wrapped up in the launch, in making sure that the technology that they're putting out is exactly the way they envisioned it, But doing so, you could lose the human element, the human edge that's really important here. And that's where optimization and keeping the human in mind is super important, right? Continuous learning, reflecting, and enhancing a product ensures a robust life cycle and a successful launch when you're moving from innovation to actually getting your products out there to consumers. So to wrap up, basically, the three key takeaways correspond to each of the three phases of the innovation cycle. So in the inspire phase, this is about discovery and opportunity analysis to understand consumer needs before solutions are locked. Do not begin with technology, begin with the human and let that guide your concept testing, your ideation, your technology development. Second, during the illuminate stage, this is all about narrative. We could turn insight into internal narrative, and this builds a business case that aligns all the stakeholders by understanding the shared goal and what success actually looks like. And then finally, in the ignite stage, this is about ongoing monitoring, ongoing learning to make sure that even towards the end or as you get closer to launching a product, we're still keeping the humans in mind. We're still focusing on consumers' needs, beliefs, and connecting with what really matters to consumers. So yeah, thank you for attending, and let us know if you have any questions. We'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek and Matt. As Matt just mentioned, we will now be taking questions that you may have on the presentation. Please go ahead and type them into the question box if you haven't already. And as I mentioned, if we don't get to your question on today's call, we will be in touch after the webinar. All right. This one came in kind of early in the presentation. So I'll go ahead and ask this. I know that you mentioned B2B off the top, and then the framework is applicable both to B2B and B2C. But it would be great to hear more about how to apply this human-centric framework for B2B companies.
Yeah, I could take this one. Derek, I think you said it right where you said B2B. The B is also humans, right? So there are humans on all sides of the equation. And so when like businesses are working together, it's still very important for exactly all three of these stages to make sure you're aligned on what success looks like, that you could have a shared narrative, that you could have a shared sense of ownership over the goal. And that's really important. And I think that is one thing that the human-centric innovation model really emphasizes, sort of thinking that how everyone is involved, what the buyer's role is, what your role is, what your business partnerships, what their role is, keeping all of that in mind. And I think also one thing that I see often with clients who work with B2B, how they use our tool and think about human-centric insights, is really keeping that human in mind. I think when you're talking across organizations, it's really easy to lose sight of the ultimate buyer is who that human is going to be, right? You either get distracted with sort of getting the marketing lingo right and communicating internally. Our tool really focuses on human values, but also the backbone is really this human language. And I think it's really easy to forget who we're ultimately talking to and get really caught up in our business speak, our proprietary terms and things like that. And so the way our approach does it really keeps us grounded, I think. And that allows better communication, better alignment overall, and ultimately, I think a more successful collaboration because the final goal, even if you're working just with another business, it downstream is still that consumer whose needs really should be driving what matters most in like the innovation.
Great, thanks for that. Here's another really good question that we've heard from some of our clients before, so I'm eager to get you to answer this here today. How do you ensure that initial insight that started the innovation journey isn't lost by the time we go to market or by the time we get to the end of the innovation journey.
Yeah, I can hop in on this one. This is one we hear all the time. I mean, up top, like, I would never say that, like, no framework is going to ensure that an insight never gets lost. Obviously, that's just impossible. The Human-Centric Innovation Framework, one of the things it's designed for is to help give organizations a better structure for keeping that insight visible, like throughout all the handoffs. But I think one of the patterns I've seen is that really insights generally get lost because a lot of organizations treat it as like a starting point. They treat it as like an initial spark, which might not be the right way to think of it, because if something's the starting point or the initial spark, then like it gets consumed in the process and disappears. But rather, like, if you kind of think of that initial human need as like a system requirement throughout the whole journey, and it's attached to it the whole journey, that makes it a bit more stable. So like the human-centric innovation model is, the whole point is to help carry that insight through, inspire, illuminate, and ignite. You know, it starts as an opportunity, and then as like the narrative business case, as Matt was saying, and validation. And then eventually, hopefully, it becomes a learning question. And by kind of focusing each step on that human need, as opposed to letting the human need of, I want to clean my bathroom without touching gross things, evolve into the wand project, but rather keeping it anchored as the project around helping people not touch gross things, and keeping it anchored at the human need, even at that level, really helps it stick. But yeah, like another thing we need to always remember is that because this whole process is thought of as a learning process, there's no promise made by the human-centric innovation model that a human need won't evolve either, right? Because your initial insight, like no matter how strong, maybe you discover something further down the line that actually makes you rethink that need, and the need evolves a little. And that's okay. That's totally fine as long as it's anchored to that initial seed, and doesn't disappear completely, but rather evolves. That's always okay too. But yeah, I would say, like, from what I've seen, the real shift that's needed is from like treating insight as just an input to treating it as like sort of like almost like a governance system, where at each stage you're like asking, like, are you still creating value for the people that this was meant to serve? Are you still creating value around the need that initiated the project? And if not, have you discovered a new need that needs a new discovery process? Or have you just like wandered off and you need to realign? So both are possible, of course, but this is like one of the most common like challenges I think every organization faces, because it's really, really hard to maintain total tracing and tracking of a need throughout the whole project.
Yeah, that's very well said, Derek.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much, Derek and Matt, for the great insight today. That will conclude our webinar. The slide presentation and recording from today's webinar will be sent to all of our attendees via email later today. After leaving the webinar, everybody will be prompted to complete a brief survey on today's presentation, and we'd appreciate your feedback to help inform and improve our future webinars. Similarly, please take a moment to check out our upcoming webinars on our website. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We hope you have an amazing day.